For me, it really was my voice and it was music. So when that was gone, it felt like my whole sense of self unraveled, which at first felt very scary. Because again, the only thing I can liken it to is that it felt like I was dying, but my body was still alive.
Yeah.
There was a point at which I crossed to the other side, and that's when it started to become riveting. I wrote, it's only when your life is in pieces that you can build something new.
Welcome to the Happiness and Progress podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Craig. I'm an Emmy Award-winning journalist, international speaker, mom, wife, and you know what I like to say, just a person looking for more joy in the everyday. If you have ever noticed in yourself that you have built this identity in this world and this expectation of yourself, and then it was taken away, I think this conversation is going to be really healing for you, because that's exactly what happened to Greta Morgan. Greta is a songwriter, storyteller, and multi-instrumentalist who began her career at the age of 16 and went to perform worldwide. She fronted Springtime Carnivore, Gold Motel, and the Hush Sound. She was also a touring member of Vampire Weekend and has performed with Jenny Lewis. In 2020, not long after contracting COVID-19, Greta lost the ability to sing. Ultimately, she was diagnosed with a neurological disorder that affected her vocal cords. That's what we're going to talk about in this conversation. And we're going to talk about her brand new book, The Lost Voice. Greta, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I'm so excited to chat with you.
Thank you for inviting me.
I just finished the book this morning, so I just feel like I just need to start this podcast with just like a moment of silence, because it was so beautiful.
Thank you.
So as I was reading through the book, it's titled The Lost Voice. And as I was reading, I was like, oh my gosh, this is your voice. The full book, here it is. How was writing this part of your healing journey?
Oh, yes. So, right, there is this physical, literal loss of my singing voice as it had been due to dysphonia. But after my diagnosis, well, actually, let me start at the beginning. When my voice shorted out, and it stopped kind of doing what I wanted it to do, when I could no longer hear a note in my head and sing it, I had been in this space of just feeling like a stranger in my own body for about 6 months. Because since I was a little kid, I have sat at the piano almost every morning of my entire life and written songs. So my voice was really how it was like eating breakfast or taking a shower. Like singing for me was something that I did every day that made me feel like myself. I say in the book it was as intrinsic to self-recognition as like seeing my own face in the mirror. So when suddenly it wasn't available, I just felt this incredible existential lack of belonging in my own body. And it
Oh
took
my
about
gosh.
6 months for a correct diagnosis, which was then confirmed by a number of different specialists. And after that, I really went into, what people would say is the dark night of the soul. Like it was just it felt like I was dying. My body was healthy other than this glitch of dysphonia for my singing voice. My body was healthy, but I really felt like I was dying. And I think it's chapter 8, I went to Escalante, Utah by myself for 40 days. It was like accidentally symbolic. I spent 40 days in the desert, but it was just because that's how the Airbnb
40 days and nights.
Yeah, exactly. The Airbnb discounts happened to work out, happened to be better for 40 days. So I was in the desert, and spending a lot of time alone. And during that time, I finally read my mother's journals with her permission. She had tried to throw them away when I was 11. I knew she was a writer. I snuck into the dumpster. I stole the journals and I kept them hidden for decades. And when I was reading her journals, one thing I discovered was like she has published a number of books. She used to write for television. There was this truth and vulnerability and viscerality in her journals that had never made it into her public work. And when I was reading her journals, I felt like, oh, that's her true voice. That's her voice. And she had confined it to the private realm. This is, of course, just my perception.
Yeah.
But as I was reading her work, I thought, oh my God, everything I've been writing about and thinking about privately, that's actually what's happened. That's actually what I'm supposed to share. as scary as it is. So with that kind of guidance and insight, and then also after taking a songwriting workshop with the amazing songwriter Mary Gaucher about creative bravery, which also reinforced these ideas of like, if your voice isn't shaking, you're not being honest enough.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Kind of attitude. The combination of those two things encouraged me to start writing the story of my life almost like a detective, looking for anything that could have possibly affected my voice. So one thing I kept doing was asking, like, am I silencing myself? Or like, am I playing any part in this kind of physical manifestation of illness? Is there anything that I am doing, or that is there anything in my life that hasn't been grieved or processed or metabolized that could be contributing to it? So I was really going back through my life and trying to look for moments that could have possibly contributed to a vocal issue.
What was your answer to that?
Oh, there were so many. I mean, I realized like I thought I was a person who didn't have a lot of regrets. And then as I was going back through my life, I was like, how could I not speak my truth? It's
Mm,
love relationships to bullies, even sometimes in songs. Like I felt like there was one version of myself in my life I felt comfortable speaking, but 90% of it I didn't.
yeah.
And I was so used, I was kind of raised in the Midwest where people are very outwardly optimistic and cheerful, and we never complain, and we never like over grieve our troubles. We're all in it together, and to just like stay really positive is always kind of
Yeah.
the outlook in the Midwest. And yeah, I realized I had silenced a lot of my own pain and grief to just appear like happy Greta Sunshine all the time.
And I think so many people can relate to that. I think that is a universal experience where, to different varying levels, but I think so many of us are accidentally silencing ourselves all the time. One of the hardest things for me to read was these conversations you were having with the doctors. Like,
Oh,
just to sit and imagine what that must have been like from just a year or two prior, where you're performing at Madison Square Garden and then now you're sitting here being told that there's an issue with your vocal cords. Tell me about like what's going through your mind. How are you processing that?
receiving a diagnosis can feel like such a huge blow
Mm,
because before I was diagnosed, it was almost like I had control over what it meant. I kind of had my own relationship with like my shaking voice, I would just call it like tremble voice or shaking voice. But once they gave me a diagnosis and then they played a video for me of all these different people with dysphonia in more accelerated stages than my own, actually my voice got way worse in the couple weeks right after that. So often there are stories where people are uh, when people receive a diagnosis, they often start manifesting more
mm,
accelerated versions of the symptoms. So it was just so shocking and so upsetting. And doctors were basically saying, based on everything we know, this usually shows up in a person's 30s. It often gets worse. You probably have as much voice right now as you will ever have. And for me, I was like, I only had about 5 or 10% of my voice at the time. So it was shocking. One thing I say in the book, it felt like a guillotine landed in my life. It was like, oh, that's who I was. And now I have no idea who I am because this is everything I've built and worked for my entire life. Like I started touring as a professional musician when I was in high school. I didn't go to college. I didn't have a backup plan. And this was always the way I showed up in the world. And yeah, so it was really heartbreaking. And it took me a long time to sort of reclaim what the diagnosis meant to me.
mm,
I think it's really important. I'll speak first person. It was really important for me to sort of step away from like spasmodic dysphonia, which is so many syllables I could barely pronounce it,
yeah.
sort of reclaim what the diagnosis meant to me, like as a shaking voice or a trembling voice or a different voice or a broken voice or a wobbly voice. Like I started developing my own relationship with the condition, and I've kind of forgotten or burned or blocked out all the things they told me about like how it's supposed to progress and like what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, I think that how has that impacted as you've moved through this and since that diagnosis?
Yeah, well, it's taken, I guess now almost 5 years. Um, I was for a long time getting these Botox injections, which are very expensive, invasive. They cause you to lose your voice for a couple weeks, and then when
Mm.
your voice comes back, you get more access. But it's like a very big commitment. And I now, almost 5 years into my experience with dysphonia, I was like, I finally feel like this is the voice I'm supposed to sing with.
Mm.
Like it's fucked up. It's weird. I can't hold pitch. I'm not technically like a good singer anymore, but when I sing, it feels like I can express things with this new version of this voice, which is a lot like uglier and stranger than I could with my perfect voice. And like there are times where I long to be able to sing like I used to. Like in my dreams all the time, I'm belting. I'm like
Yeah.
singing and there's freedom and there's ease and I'm just like, like singing to the back of the room. And then I wake up and I'm, going to the creek and singing to the animals or whatever, and my voice is weird and shaky and wobbly. But I'm just trusting that this is the new incarnation of my artistic constraint, and within creative constraints there's always freedom. So like
Mm.
for example, if I used to have this much voice and now I only have this much voice, the words have to be so much more visceral. And so
Wow.
I'm really working with language and limited range and writing the kind of style of songs that someone like Lou Reed or Leonard Cohen or Bob Dylan would sing.
Wow. That's so beautiful to be able to find that trust in this process and trust your voice now, I think.
One of the things I've been thinking is like, what I thought of as a great voice is based on what Western culture has given me. And so it's like if you step outside of what Western culture thinks is beautiful, there's so many styles of singing. Like you listen to Indian throat singers, like it's such a different sound. And you go and listen to some of the animals that are singing in the woods, and they're like croaking and they're shrill and they're chirping. And like a coyote is killing a rabbit, and the rabbit is like squealing right to the sky. And there's so many of these sounds that are beyond the human that I find really beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's really helping me feel like, wow, what can I do with my voice that's like as interesting as these things, as opposed to singing like these fantastic Western singers?
Yeah, I have goosebumps. That's so beautiful because I think so many of these definitions of what is good, out singing and otherwise, were made up long before we existed or
Yeah.
here as humans. And I just think like what an incredible journey to be able to go on. Wow.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, it's the same thing like with beauty,
Oh,
like
oh
what
yeah.
Western culture could have chose anything else to be beautiful. Like we could have been like a giant chin hair is a mark of beauty, like
That could still
like
happen.
that's true. It's not too late, but like we could have chosen something completely different rather than like porcelain skinned symmetry or whatever. Like we could,
Yes.
yeah, our culture could have picked something totally different.
1000%. One of the things, even as you're talking here and throughout the book, I just kind of got stuck on was that losing your identity because singing wasn't just something you did. It really seemed like it was who you were. Like that was the embodiment of you. What was that like to lose that sense of purpose and your identity?
Yeah, I mean, singing was the way I expressed my truth, the way I met most of my friends, other than my true lifelong, friends. But most of my friends in the last 10 years were musicians and creators. The way I formed relationships, like it's how I met most of the people I dated and loved. It was how I earned a living since I was 16. So, yeah, when that went away, it was like, it felt like the ground was gone. Like all of a sudden, I think I had such a sense of music is the thing that keeps me safe. We all have something like
Mm-hmm.
that. We all have a sense of like, here's what I rest my stability on. The rest of the world may be complete chaos, but here's, here's the thing that always keeps me stable. And for a lot of people, it's their family or it's their relationships or it's their health or, whatever. For me, it really was my voice and it was music. So when that was gone, it felt like my whole sense of self unraveled, which at first felt very scary. Because again, the only thing I can liken it to is that it felt like I was dying, but my body was still alive.
Yeah.
And but then there was a point at which I crossed to the other side, and that's when it started to become riveting. One thing I remember writing in my journal, it didn't make it into the book, but I wrote, it's only when your life is in pieces that you can build something new.
Mm.
Because so often when our lives are very secure and the foundation is totally set, and we have our interweavings with our community and our interweavings with our career, and we have this kind of sense of interdependence and responsibility, it's very hard to just rip oneself out of a life in that way. So I kind of was like pushed into this space where all of a sudden I had total freedom.
That making that shift, because I think a lot of people deal with this in some way or another. I had this massive concussion where I in a conversation couldn't even process what someone was saying to me in enough time to repeat it back. And I had the podcast at the time. I was public speaking at the time, and my background was news anchoring. So I'd do like if there was breaking news, I could do a 2 hour show just on ad-libbing facts, and then suddenly I couldn't have these conversations. And so I think we're not alone. And at some point in our lives thinking, oh my gosh, like if I'm not this, then who am I?
Mhm.
If there was like one piece of advice to someone to like dig a little deeper past that like identity we've created for ourselves, what would that piece of advice be?
Mm. Mm. I think figure out what you love because it's so easy to get caught up in who people think we are and our desire to perform who they want us to be. But when we really get honest about what do I love and what do I desire and what is the thing that is making me feel alive, that answer is what will lead us to the next step. Like I knew so little about what my future looked like, but I knew I loved being in wilderness areas. I knew I loved writing on the page, and I knew I loved being in silence and listening. And pretty much every piece of my new life that has now been built has come from those places.
I think that's just incredible to have enough faith, even though you didn't know what the future looked like, to keep moving forward.
Right, yeah. And when I was writing this book, so many people, including people who love me very much, had no idea why I was doing this or like they were sort of like, what are you writing about? Oh, maybe that'll help a couple people with dysphonia. Or like, oh, shouldn't you try writing songs for Lady Gaga? You're not a proven writer, you're a proven songwriter,
Yeah.
so another thing I will say as a piece of advice to anyone who's going through that is to like to trust that worthiness is a gift you give to yourself. So once you figure out that thing, once you figure out what you love, you have to have this like single-minded devotion to love it and to trust that you are worthy of doing it. So
Hmm.
it's like, I wanted to be a writer. I had this trust, like yeah, I didn't go to college. I don't have an MFA. I have no idea what the fuck I'm doing. I write in my diary every day since I was 12, and I like telling stories at dinner, and I like writing funny emails. Like those were the only like proof of
Those
evidence.
are great qualifications. I love
That,
it.
that was the only evidence that I was like, maybe I could write something one day.
Yeah.
But I just kind of decided like this is the story that's happening. This is the story I want to tell. I'm worthy of telling it, and no matter what people say, I'm going to finish this book.
Yeah. I'm so glad you did this. And I feel like this is going to affect a lot of people. I think it's going to impact a lot of lives. This is just such a beautiful piece of work, a beautiful piece of art, truly.
Thank
So,
you.
um, as you were going through this, there's a time where I don't know how long these lasted. In the book, it kind of seems like you had suicidal thoughts for like maybe an evening or a moment.
Mhm.
How did you move through that? How did you say, wait, no, this isn't the end for me?
Yeah, well, so that period of time and the weeks and months after the diagnosis, I could feel myself becoming more and more depressed. I also had started doing speech therapist with an amazing therapist who I still work with. Shout out to Lori Sonnenberg. But it revealed just truly how decimated my voice was. And also the weight of the pandemic it was such a dark moment in our kind of cultural
Mm.
in the collective nervous system. It was a very stressful and dark time. And I was just increasingly getting more depressed every day. So every day when I woke up, it was like, wow, how long do I have to be awake before I can go to bed again tonight? And it was just getting more and more like I didn't even want to be awake. And then, yes, there's that moment I write about in the book where I'm like, what if I just didn't have to wake up?
Yeah.
Uh, but, there I write about my best childhood friend committing suicide in the book, which was one of the big heartbreaks of my life. And I write about sort of like communicating with her in a way of finding my hope again. And and then also, it was a combination of sort of feeling her spirit and feeling her presence. I have goosebumps right now. She's probably
Mm.
here. And and then also making this decision to turn toward what I loved. So I decided to go to the desert and to go back to Utah to go to Escalante. And that again, it was like this moment of dumb hope. It was like a psychic ping of intuition. I don't know what's there, but I know I have to go there. And by doing that, that was how I shook myself out of it.
That just the feeling that gives me in my chest is just like I can't even explain it. It's like hope. You know what I think it is? It's hope.
Right. Yeah. It's hope. And if we explain these, like, I think this happens to everyone, I would imagine. It's like there's a moment where you're like, oh my God, if I did that, I think this might happen. Like you
Hmm.
just have these tiny little intuitions. You don't know what the big picture is. But if we tell people in our lives, like, here's what I'm going to do and here's what I'm hoping will happen, so often we will get talked out of it. I,
Yeah.
I'm pretty private about my deepest longings of what I want to learn and do. I keep them very close to the vest.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to go. A couple things you said. I loved in the book when you had this aha moment that you'd heard vision is not the same as sight. Perhaps voice is not the same thing as singing. I thought that was so beautiful. And then I also wanted to read this piece. Um, as you kind of started to redefine your voice. And I think in this is that redefinition of who I am, what's my identity. And so you wrote, I decided to redefine my voice as any expression of my heart. The way I listened could become my voice. The way I wrote postcards to friends could become my voice. The way I witnessed the world around me could become my voice. The way I picked up trash on hikes could become my voice. Cooking a meal for someone I loved could become my voice. Any art I made in any medium could become my voice as long as it came from the truth of my heart. By that definition, my creativity was boundless. End quote. That moment of recognition, just take me there. I just think that is so beautiful because a lot of us want this, like grandiose thing. We do this huge thing, but writing a postcard to your friends, picking up trash on a hike, it's so beautiful. And I love that as an expression of your heart and your voice.
Yeah, well, once again, this comes back to cultural programming. Like we've been taught that art is a very specific thing and it's valued in a very specific way. And if your art is not valued in this very specific way, well, it must be worthless. It's this lie that we've been told for a really long time, but building a beautiful life is as important or more important than any piece of art that I am ever going to make. So just focusing on making my days beautiful in a way that's invisible to other, you know, to the extended world, that is as important to me as like the next book that I want to write or the next song that I want to write. But yeah,
Hmm.
that
We
real
lose it. Yeah.
we totally. And I know some of the people I know who are the most beautiful artists who live the most artistic lives, they've never made a cent from their art. But just being around them is like it's like inspiration in a bottle.
Mm, that's incredible. This is called The Lost Voice. That's the name of the book. What did you gain through this experience?
Oh, it's interesting. right before this call, I was talking to a friend who's known me for about 10 years. And she was telling me what she perceived that I have gained through this experience, which
Mm.
I thought was really interesting. She said, when I first met you, you had complete blinders on and all you were focused on was music. You were going to be like the next great indie darling, whether it's as a member of Vampire Weekend or as a solo artist or whatever. And she said, I remember going over to your house, you had a spreadsheet of all your songs. You had 50 songs. You knew exactly what needed to be done and you had all your studio time booked. And she was like, you were obsessive. And I was obsessive about music at the cost of building a domestic life, having beautiful romantic relationships, showing up for my family for important events like funerals and weddings and births. I was so single-mindedly focused on music at the cost of my body, at the cost of my nervous system. So what have I gained? Um, I have gained like my spectrum of what makes me happy went from this to this.
Oh my gosh. If you're listening, it was like what,
Yeah.
like three
Yeah. So
inches
my
and then the
hands,
whole screen.
yeah. So, right. Yeah. So my hands went, my hands are right in front of me. My spectrum of what made me happy was very narrow. Now the spectrum of what can make me happy, is so much wider. And I think one of the biggest changes is just the whole portion of my early professional life was about me bringing to life the exact visions I had in my head. I hate to use
Hmm.
the word manifesting because it's such an eye roll, but but I did feel in a sense like I envisioned something and then I created it. And once I lost my voice, it was this pivot point at which I began to ask, what is life asking me to do? It's no longer about me creating a vision. It's about me being in service to a vision that wants to work through me. And that's a big part of why I've become a writer, why I've become a teacher, why I've started working with other people on their creative projects, helping other people find their voices. I listen in a way that is so much more rooted in what do you want from me? Like
Yeah.
powers that be, what do you want me to do? As opposed to like, I'm Greta Morgan and here's what I want to do next.
I identify with that so much. And well, I've been working really hard on trying to be the person who listens and can let go of control and be guided. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, I'm a control freak.
It's funny. That's the exact word. When I was talking to my friend who's known me for 10 years, she said, you gave up control. She
Yeah.
was like, you gave up control and I want to give up control too.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Incredible, incredible. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Incredible work. The last question I ask everyone is, what is your number one tip to finding more joy in the good, the bad, and the in between?
Oh, okay. For me, it's finding amusement. Like, no matter how miserable I am, I can look for something funny that will make it a good story later.
Love that.
Yeah.
Love that. That's so simple.
Yeah, just find the one funny thing. If you're stuck at the airport for 7 hours overnight and you're exhausted, what is like the one funny interaction you can tell your friend about the next day?
Greta, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I hope you loved this conversation. I'm going to give away a copy of this book this month. So if you would like to win it, go over to Instagram and you'll find out how. Make sure you're following me there and everything will become apparent on how to do it. Of course, you can find all you need to know in show notes. And I want to thank you for being here on Happiness in Progress.